Good evening, everyone. We're going to continue our study of the book of Revelation with chapter 6. And I almost guarantee you this is going to be a different perspective on chapter 6 than you probably heard before. I just see a pattern here, especially with the four horsemen of the apocalypse, that others don't acknowledge. And so as we get into it, I will talk about the most common interpretations, but then I want to go through my own thoughts on the matter. So let's get started. And it says here in the Word, it says, "Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." So we have the first horseman on the white horse. And so let's break down what we have here. We have a rider on a white horse with a bow, symbol of long-reaching power, crown, symbol of authority, and a mission to conquer the world. So most people debate between two sides of this issue. One, that this is symbolic of Christ himself at his return. There's some problems with that. In fact, we see his return, I believe it's in chapter 19 of the book of Revelation, is much grander than this. And so it makes that perspective a little bit shaky. Some say it's the Antichrist copying Christ, trying to copy what Christ will do later on in the book of Revelation. Also, people like to note that there's a bow but no arrows, so it shows that even though he has long-reaching power, it's not very significant. And so that's a possibility as well. And I believe also there's a third possibility, which I'll get to after I mention the remaining three horsemen. So let's move further down a little bit. The next one, verse number 3, says, "When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, 'Come and see.' Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword." So we have this next horseman who rides on a fiery red horse. Many identify him with war. His mission is to take peace from the earth. And he has a sword, which is another symbol of power. And a lot of people think that this may be tied in with a one last great world conflict, a World War III, if you will. And that's a possibility, though the rider is not directly connected to war, just with violence and hostility. So we'll look into that a little bit further as well. Let's go down to the third horseman. "When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, 'Come and see.' So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, 'A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine.'" So we have this scarcity of goods. Many identify the black horse with famine, and which is a high possibility. We definitely have seen famines over the years that have affected the markets and affected how much things cost. And so that is a high possibility. So let's get now to the fourth horseman. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the four living creatures saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him, and power was given him over a fourth of the earth, to kill with the sword, with hunger, and with death, and by the beasts of the earth. So we have this last horseman, also the symbol of death. A lot of people tie in with pestilence and possible plague. We do know that as a result of this seal being opened, that the fourth of the population of the earth, which that's over 1 billion people, will die at this time. And it's a horrendous thing for us to try to wrap our minds around. Our recent pandemic that we're dealing with, we're talking about in the numbers of less than 1 million, and probably way less than that, even worldwide, that will die as a result of this virus. And can you imagine 1 billion people dying or more? It's definitely, or actually could be a couple of billion people would die. That's astronomical numbers. So I mentioned these four horsemen. The horseman in white, which many want to identify with Christ, or most with the Antichrist. The rider on the fiery red horse with war. The rider of the black horse with famine, and now the pale horse with pestilence and death. So that's what most of your commentaries will give you a variation on. One thing I've noticed, it's kind of been reinforced of late with what we're dealing with now, is there is a pattern that I can't get away from. And it occurred to me a few years ago when I began to do a study of the book of Revelation and began to do a study of this chapter. And I began to focus on what does each horse mean, what each horseman means. And it just kind of seemed to click together for me. And if we look at each horseman individually, we have first the white horse. The rider of the white horse. This rider is associated with conquering. And to conquer means to subjugate. It means to take control of someone or a group of someone's and bring them under your will, which means you strip them of a certain amount of their personal liberties or all of their personal liberties. To bring them in line with what you need them to do or you want them to be. And so as I began to think about that, and I began to think of the world at this time, this post-rapture world, I began to realize, well, the governments of the world, of course, they're going to need to consolidate in order to create a sense of security, and they're going to have to begin to take away personal liberties, i.e. conquer individuals. And we can see that a little bit in what we've had to deal with this recent pandemic. In order for the government to establish a sense of security, we've had to give up, of course, in our country, voluntarily for the most part, some of our liberties. We have limited where we can go. We've limited what we can do in order to be safe during this time of crisis. And I very much can see something similar and even greater in scale happening in a post-rapture world. You have millions of people, all of a sudden, poof, they're gone, and people are going to be scared. And so the government's going to have, and governments are going to have to consolidate in certain ways, and they're going to have to come together, and they're going to have to conquer, and they're going to have to strip people of personal liberties, and in order to create stability. And so I see that happening, and I also know what happens when that happens. And we can see that as people have had to sequester in place and people have had to stay at home, we have seen both a rise in domestic violence and people against each other, and we are beginning to see protests, which are now, of course, nonviolent protests, but nonviolent. If these things drag on, they turn into violence. We've seen that around the world during times of civil unrest. It is not hard for protests to turn into riots, and this violence just increase, and so we can see that happening. Then that leads to also a limit of resources. Well, what's happened in this latest pandemic? We have seen one of the first things that happened as the government has had to implement guidelines and instructions and our personal liberties began to be limited. Guess what happens? Things started disappearing off the store shelves. I mean, there was a run on toilet paper. I mean, of toilet paper of all things. I mean, for crying out loud, toilet paper became a scarce commodity for a while. I've seen the store shelves cleared out like I haven't seen in years, except after a natural disaster such as a hurricane or something like that. And that was just basically hoarding of individuals that based on fear and insecurity, and not on actual scarcity of resources. But during this day, there will also be a scarcity of resources, which will come in as natural disasters begin to happen on a global scale, and we can see this getting worse. And as a result of all of this, as violence amongst individuals increases, as natural disasters increase, as resources become more scarce, then people are going to die. And that's what happens. You have death coming in, this last element, where a fourth of the earth population that's left after the rapture, possibly billions of people at this point, die. They die from the violence. They die from natural things. It's kind of implied that there may be a pandemic far worse than the one we're dealing with right now that might actually be in there as well. And so we can see this. And I just see that there's a pattern there that we just cannot blindly ignore. And that's why when people have said, well, do you believe this current pandemic we are in is a sign we're in the last days? And I say I don't believe we're in the tribulation period right now, but I believe this is a preparation for it. And we just need to be aware and of what can happen. And I'm glad it seems like we're coming towards an end to this crisis we're dealing with now. And I do say I believe that our government handled things as best as possible and to give us a sense of security during this time. And I thank them for that. But I can see how the same things that happen here under a more oppressive time, a time that's manipulated by the Antichrist, how severe it can be. And like I said earlier, I believe each horse is representative of a different element of suffering that will occur during the tribulation time at the very beginning of it, in a post-rapture world. But that's just the beginning of things. More things occur, more seals open. In fact, we have the fifth seal. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. So we have a lot of things told to us here. First, we have the martyred dead that are crying out for justice. And they're wondering, how much longer is this going to happen? How much longer is God going to hold back his punishment upon the earth? How much longer? They're wanting their sacrifice to be avenged. And we have them being calmed down. They're given their robes of white, their robes of purity. They had paid the ultimate price, and they get these robes of white, these robes of purity and righteousness, which they earned with their own blood, shedding it because of their belief and trust in Jesus Christ. We have these martyred dead, and then we have them being given these white robes, and then they're being calmed down, and then we're told something that I believe is very powerful, because a lot of people have some questions about, will they be post-rapture converts? And it appears that chapter 6 tells us that, because it says, rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. So we have this telling to them that there are more that will be martyred. There are more that will they will have to die the martyr's death. And so, at least in the early part of the tribulation period, there has to be converts. There has to be those that realize, something's happened. What's happened? And they turn to the Lord. And I've seen videos, and in fact, the whole Left Behind series of books and movies is based on this interpretation. And so it is definitely what appears to be happening in the text. And then we have, after this, we have the sixth seal. I looked, and he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs. Then it is shaken by a mighty wind, and the sky receded as a scroll when it rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place, and the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? So we have a great natural disaster that is occurring, or multiple disasters that are occurring at one time. There's several possibilities of how the Lord is going to bring these to be. Of course, the idea of multiple natural disasters occurring is a high probability. And we can see, I mean, you have earthquakes, volcanic activity, possible meteor showers, and all this happening at one time. Or we could have one major catastrophic event that could also generate all these. Asteroid strike on the Earth. As it's breaking up, it can break up into fragments, but still have one major mass, which would cause earthquakes. It would cause the skies to roll up like a scroll as they become black. As dust particulates go up in the air, the moon would appear like blood. I mean, there's possibility there. Super volcanic eruption, that's another possibility. Volcanic eruption like that. You'd have earthquakes. You'd have debris thrown up in the air. You would have pyroclastic stones falling down as a result of it. So that's a possibility as well. So we have here either multiple simultaneous natural disasters, or we have one major catastrophic natural disaster that produces several phenomenon. And then as a result of that, we have people fleeing to the mountains, to the hills, and they're crying out basically to die. And they come to a realization that this is not just something that is happening. This is God. And it's one thing I've seen during this latest pandemic that we're dealing with. You have some that believe this is some kind of sign from the Lord to get our attention. And you have others that's just kind of writing it off as just something that has happened. And I believe that definitely this is, Lord is using these events to get our attention. And so we need to be aware of that. But some people are still holding back. They don't want to give God the acknowledgement of who He is. But it seems like on this day, the things that are happening are so severe that there's no doubt it's God. But yet we don't have the whole world turning to Him, which is sad. In fact, one of the saddest things about the book of Revelation is as we travel through there, it seems like God is pouring out His wrath and His judgment, not all at one time. He's not just dragging it out to be mean. I believe He's doing it intentionally to be merciful, but you see people's reactions, and people are still rebelling against Him. They refuse to give Him the honor and the glory that He deserves. It is one thing to acknowledge that He's doing something. It's another thing to praise Him and call upon His love and His mercy to save and to help. And so we begin to see that as we go forward. And I hope that I've said some things tonight that might at least get your mind going and thinking about things and reflecting on these things. And reflecting on like our current situation. The current situation we're in is a temporary situation. But there's coming a day when the final judgment of the Lord begins to be poured out, that it'll just be a situation where things just progressively get worse. I'm glad we're in a time right now where it seems like things are getting better. But there will be a time coming when things will just keep getting worse and worse and worse. And that's why I'm trusting in Him and believing in the power of the rapture to pull out the church prior to these things. And it's definitely not something to look forward to going through this stuff. So, all right. Well, I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your prayers. And next week we will continue in chapter 7. And until then, God bless you.